pandemic has affected our communities and affected the most vulnerable. And at YNCU, we believe that families in need are our priority to help and serve. That's why we've chosen the Food Bank to be an organization that we support through the Waffles in the Warehouse campaign.
Good morning and welcome to our 8th annual Waffles in the Warehouse, our second year hosting it virtually. We did not imagine this time last year that we would be again virtual, but at least we have some COVID protection. I'm here with our guest speaker this morning, who I'll introduce in a moment, but we're thrilled to be here at the Food Bank and unfortunately missing all of you here at the Food Bank this morning. Normally we would be touring our amazing 31,000 square foot facility, talking and taking in all of the changes that we've implemented here at the Food Bank as a result of the pandemic. But I hope everybody had a chance to go into the expo rooms, meet some of our team members, and learn a little bit more about some of the phenomenal things that have been happening here at the Food Bank over the last 18 months. But like everything else, and like all of your businesses and your organizations, we continue to adapt. And joining us virtually today is one way that you've been able to help us do that. So thank you so much. Waffles has pivoted again this year, and a lot of people are joining us from their homes, but also back in their offices, which is really exciting. And we want to sort of start our day by thanking some amazing community leaders and partners who have supported Waffles in the Warehouse at home. Our presenting sponsor, your Neighbourhood Credit Union, who we just heard from. Our main stage sponsors, Malo Blamey, Joseph & Company, the Ray Lipsky Partnership. Our program sponsor, Kitchener Utilities. Our networking sponsors, GHD, Clean and Tidy, SG Cunningham, Waterloo Honda, 5-9 Solutions, Terry Howell Pools, the Dean Group, Libro Credit Union, Waterloo Regional Police, Air One Heating and Cooling, Fastenal, Royal LePage Woolley Realty. Our Q&A sponsor, Henry Welzer, and our gift sponsor, Paquette Travers. Thank you so much for your support of this event and your continued support of the Food Bank of Waterloo Region. It is really important for me every time I have a chance now to speak to an audience or speak to our community to recognize the tireless effort of more than 100 community food programs and agency partners that are part of our community food assistance network. Staff and volunteers throughout the last year have done absolutely amazing things. In the early days of the pandemic and the months that followed, some of our community programs and agency partners had to temporarily close. We had to streamline distribution locations throughout the community because we wanted to do our part to support to help stop the spread of the pandemic, but also support the health and safety of our staff and our volunteers. These programs and partners were the first line of support, and they were not only able to pivot their programs, but they were able to support each other during difficult times. So as programs closed, staff and volunteers moved to other programs to provide additional supports and services. It was an amazing collaborative team effort, and it really showed the support that this community food assistance network has throughout our community and will continue to have in the weeks and months to come. Without the support of these programs, without the support of you, our community, thousands of people in our community would not have received the care and support and the resources they needed. And they were able to get that support and those resources, and they survived and they were able to thrive. So we're so grateful for that. I have been here at the Food Bank for 22 years today, believe it or not. But the last 18 months have been incredibly eye-opening for me. I have heard stories that have highlighted the significant gaps in services and supports, from the closure of public washrooms that left people with nowhere to relieve themselves, to the precariously housed and low-income households who were facing additional challenges as programs closed and limitations to service were being implemented throughout our community. When it came to putting food on the table, it was one of the things that people worried about, but quickly didn't have to worry about it because of the resilience of this network. The pandemic showed us also significant gaps in supports throughout other parts of our community. Limited resources, capacity limits, lengthy waiting lists, access to affordable housing, other resources. And so today I hope our conversation is a little more about food, but about a community and how we can remove the stigma, the myths, the assumptions about vulnerable populations in our community. I want us to take an opportunity to talk about and think about different issues, how we work together to find solutions to ensure that people have access to supports and services they need when and where they need them. If the last year has taught us anything, it's that no one is immune to needing help. That hunger can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Today, we're going to talk about barriers, about lack of affordable housing, unemployment, health issues, specifically mental health issues, and how those things can impact people's access to food, but other services, and how a collaborative approach can ensure that people can get the supports they need in our community. Today, I'm joined by Aleksandra Petrovic, the Executive Director of the Social Development Center of Waterloo Region. Welcome.
Thank you.
Aleksandra was trained in adult education and community development in Yugoslavia during the Civil War. Nonviolence, women's political rights, and gender identity studies opened new frontiers for her and social development work in Ontario and Quebec, addressing housing, income security, and anti-poverty rooted in inclusivity beyond traditional social justice approaches. Later this morning, we're also going to welcome our keynote speaker, Wendy Gale, who will share a powerful journey of extraordinary challenges and what it is like accessing emergency food later in life. So let's jump right into it. This is where there should be applause.
Yes, 22 years to the day, and
To the day.
Equinox, right? And the balance of day and night, and good time to reflect.
Happy first day of fall. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You and I met by phone in the summer when we started talking about this event, but also we've had some interesting connections through some mutual partners as we've been doing some really interesting collaborative work in the community. But I want to start by letting you tell our audience about just a little bit about the Social Development Center. So many of us know, the vision of the center is around fair and equitable access to social, economic, and political life for everyone in Waterloo Region and making those connections through grassroots and collaborative approaches. But tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the Social Development Center, but how people can connect to programs and supports and the role you play in that.
Social Development Center, Waterloo Region, got this name in 2016, but is known to the community for 50 years as a social planning council, Kitchener-Waterloo, and Community Information Center, Waterloo Region. Elements of both are still present, but better integrated than before. So when we say our main activity is community development, what does that mean? It can mean very different things to different people. Basically, it is supporting what is already happening in the community and finding ways to connect different pieces for better and more complete either access to service or service provision, and then finding how to do the things we do better as systems. And on the other hand, social planning, community-based social planning. What does that mean when we compare it to providing food directly to people, right? Or providing shelter? Well, it is also a different way to work with people when they're not recipients, right, of services, or they're not in terms of research and planning, when they're not objects, right, or subjects in research, they are actually researchers. How do we make those shifts is at the core of what we do and how we share what we learn. So truly putting people at the center where they define the questions, they identify the gaps, and most importantly, they tell us how we can together implement solutions because they know best it's about their lives.
It's so interesting as you're talking, and it triggered for me human-centered approaches to design and to planning, and we've always followed that model. And I just now connected the dot back to one of the founding organizations of the food bank back in 1984 was the Social Planning Council. And so it's interesting for me, this many years later, that we do have some of those approaches to how we operate, and we're going to work on a fun project together this fall to connect those dots even more, which is amazing. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration, because we know that collaboration in this community, we talk about this a lot in Waterloo region, about how we have a unique sort of collaborative spirit in this community that is different from other parts of the country where, we've always worked together, but it's really been amplified during the pandemic, where we've seen community, government partners, charitable partners really rally together and work together to not just ensure that the vital supports and services were operating, but that we were sort of looking at solutions and making connections and filling gaps. So I'm wondering your thoughts on how do you feel that collaboration has really supported residents in the last year and a half, particularly the most vulnerable in our community? So we've been working with programs who are supporting those who are food insecure. We've been working with homeless and outreach populations. We've had calls with people who are navigating mental health challenges, physical, emotional health challenges. How do you think these collaborative partnerships have really helped to improve those supports and services?
It was, in a sense, big transformation. Even though we collaborated in the past with, as you said, municipalities or service providers, municipal service providers, the whole spectrum that we see in the community is coming together. Not only coming together, examples really, Better Tent City, right? Or now we're seeing it through eviction prevention program, or the work that is done by food bank and local partners, have opened up this person-centered importance in the work we do. So residents are changing the way they support the community. And not only would they be giving, right, or doing it from a perspective of I'm vulnerable, right, and I have something to give, but I don't need to change. Now we're seeing broader and broader segments of community, homeowners helping homeless or cooking with them. We are seeing in many regards that we do not look at a service as a box and try to introduce person fit that box. We're all adapting. So having from businesses to community organizations to grassroots groups to municipal and social services, everybody working together is important. But what's transformational, I guess, Wendy, is this piece where I am vulnerable as everybody else. That understanding. Convergence with Black Lives Matter, land back, reallocate. We are all willing to change these days so much more than before the pandemic, because we recognize that we're interdependent in the community and that everything we live, everything that's happening impacts us all one way or the other. And we're truly coming together in different ways.
And do you think that that's going to continue, right? So we all talk about, let's get back to normal. When are we going to get back to normal? Is this the new normal? And is this going to be the new normal that's actually going to help us change some attitudes and change how people think about innovative solutions and how we can look at things differently, like a Better Tent City, and actually house people and feed people in a really different, unique way, but having an impact? Are those things going to continue when we're finally out of this?
Well, we did talk about the impact of technologies in our lives, right? And some of us, as we age, they're like, oh, will things ever, be more touchy-feely as before? But they're not, right? So we have to adapt to that. And this is one of the things that's changing that I'm actually looking forward to. We're never going back, because I don't think we can ever go back in so many respects. Once we started having people in the center collectively, so it's no longer, a small social development center telling folks that actually we do not research people, we work with them. So we gain the knowledge and build on their expertise. We're not going back. Equally, if we have systems in housing and shelter system that are recognizing the impact of the pandemic and seeing clearly that we can no longer say, well, people just have to fit, because underserved populations, if they were not served traditionally, services are not adapted for them. And this way of social development center is in many ways a backbone part of social infrastructure. Food bank is, right? We're not being everything to everybody. We are providing the lifeline, sharing our resources, our expertise, our capacity, and making sure that in the communities, the groups that are doing 24/7 mutual support, they can be everything to the people they're connected with. So whenever we hear, oh, well, really we cannot do it because there's so many different people and so many different needs, the Social Development Center will stop and say, well, then we may not be the right immediate delivery point. We have to support those that can provide cultural, spiritual, emotional, psychological support, or bridging to services in ways that are appropriate. And the more and more we integrate those connectors into our midst, where as a collective, as a whole organism, breathing better.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's the lesson learned. We keep calling them COVID silver linings about how we've learned how we have to adapt as an organization, and other organizations are also going to have to adapt. It's not, I love what you said about it, there isn't a fit. It's not a one size fits all solution anymore. And if our audience did the expo this morning about our perishable delivery food packing and some snippets of things that are going on in the warehouse here, we've changed everything. And the answer to the question in the very first couple of months of the pandemic, anytime somebody asks me a question, can we do this for this program? Yes. Can we get this type of food for this program? Yes. And one of the greatest conversations I had was with your board member. I'm going to shout out to Laura Hamilton, who is amazing, who's doing some really phenomenal work with Better Tent City, and having conversations with Laura about what the actual specific needs were, but why that was needed. It helped us understand how we were going to have to order food, how we were going to have to pack food, how we were going to have to distribute food to be able to meet the needs of a group of people who were on the outside of our regular processes and our regular systems. And that was a game changer for us. So I want to lead into that piece of it. I think we're going to run out of time here at some point. Somebody's going to come running in the door and tell us to stop talking. But I want to talk about how we know one thing we also have learned is the challenges and barriers. So when we started this, 18 months ago, we had a pretty solid pandemic plan here, but very quickly we identified that people were having trouble accessing systems, not necessarily just food systems, but healthcare systems and shelter systems and housing. We identified that there are more challenges and barriers than I think any of us ever imagined were out there in our community. So what do you think, from the work that you've done and the interactions that you've had, what do you think some of the challenges and barriers are in our community that are preventing people from accessing established, more mainstream supports and services? We get calls every single day from people who are trying to access services, but they can't. So what do you think those barriers are, and how can we start working towards fixing them?
You said we would run out of time. And
Yeah.
we'll run out of time very quickly if it becomes, listing some of those barriers. But I guess for the time that we do have, coming back to the diversity that has grown across communities in so many respects, and the diversity that we neglected to include in protocols and processes and policies. It is true, if we look from indigenous populations to racialized populations, if we look at LGBTQ to us community, until we have conversations, not from the point of view, what obstacles do you have? right? What obstacle does a person have or a particular group? We won't necessarily be able to articulate workable solution. When the question becomes, what obstacle is my organization or the service I provide, what are the obstacles within systems? Then it becomes a different conversation. Then we understand where the gaps are, then we are able to find workable solutions constantly in a space, as I said, of wanting to change. It's not that we say we're far from perfect, but we don't behave that way it's many times. And being in a space, in a mindset that we are part of the community, we're interconnected, and we're willing to learn and change. It's a different place for services, and we're seeing it from within system services or social services. We're seeing it in the community with our neighbors and people who help either unsheltered or food insecure. We're seeing it everywhere. It's permeating even the most, used to be monolithic mainstream.
And then having this really great collaborative way to start picking apart new opportunities and new solutions. So thank you. We could talk for hours. We're going to keep talking. At the end of this, more coffee is coming, but we're gonna move on because we have an incredible keynote speaker who's joined us this morning. She's in the next room. But before we get to that, I just want to remind everybody to join us following the keynote presentation. We're going to have a virtual Q&A session. We'll be back to answer your questions, and we'll be able to maybe dig a little deeper into some of this. That was just sort of a snapshot, but jump into the Q&A session. You can put your questions in the chat. We're going to read them off the screen over here, and we'll do that after our keynote. But we're going to jump right in, and I don't want to give too much away because Wendy Gale is going to tell you her story this morning. But I just wanted to welcome Wendy. And Wendy first reached out to us last year in 2020. And she worked with our food assistance outreach coordinator at a time when we had established our centralized food assistance referral line. And Wendy was trying to locate a food program that offered a delivery service to meet her needs in the early days of the pandemic. And we know that it is not easy for anybody to share a personal journey especially on a very public scale. But we are so grateful for Wendy to join us today. You are just going to love her. And with that, I would like to welcome Wendy Gale to our stage this morning.
Hiya. Thank you, Wendy, for your very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy. And one of the main reasons I'm here today is to tell my story and to let you know that it is okay to ask for help. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Wendy Campbell and the incredible staff and volunteers at the Food Bank of Waterloo Region. As you will hear, it is because of their hard work that I've been able to continue taking my life back. I was given the number to the Food Bank of Waterloo Region by a friend in 2017, but I didn't have the courage to call until 3 years later. Let me explain why. I grew up in a strict household and from a very early age was taught to be self-sufficient. In our house, you never asked anyone for anything. And while this approach served me well, and many times throughout my life, as I put myself through recreational pilot training, a few university degrees, and multiple career changes, it also made other parts of my life difficult. I was born an only child to a financially comfortable but very dysfunctional family. My mother was an alcoholic and abusive my entire life. My father was a strict disciplinary who never believed in my potential. I may have had a roof over my head and a place to sleep at night, but I can assure you it wasn't a home. Like many people in our community, and possibly even some of you in attendance today, I grew up facing one roadblock after another: family abuse and neglect, health issues, and more than one unexpected job loss. My life wasn't easy, but I suppose no one's journey is. I moved out of the house at the age of 18 to pursue my university education, which I financed on my own. Later in life, I left an abusive relationship with very little and started my life all over again. Still not one to ask for help, I worked 2 to 3 jobs to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. Fast forward a few years to 2015. While leaving work, I was involved in a car accident that left me with some physical injuries. And it was around this time I started accepting some help from friends, personal support workers, and physiotherapists. And this wasn't easy for me, but was very important preparation for things to come, including a relationship with the Food Bank of Waterloo region. So I retired in 2017 with a low OAS, CPP, and no RRSPs. It was nearly impossible to afford my basic living expenses, such as food and rent. I sold my car, canceled my internet, and stopped many of the things I loved, such as traveling, shopping, going to restaurants, and enjoying movies. I became very isolated. Did I ask for help? Yeah, not yet. In fact, it wasn't until around November 2020 that I finally admitted to myself that I needed temporary emergency food assistance. I remember feeling so ashamed because I was raised not to ask for help. I thought I had failed, that no one could possibly understand my situation. Little did I know that seniors 65 plus represent about 4% of people in Waterloo region accessing emergency food assistance. It took me an hour to make that very first call to the food bank. I thought I would be judged or yelled at for being so weak. I couldn't have been more wrong. Everyone, from the receptionist to Kaylin, the outreach coordinator, to the staff at the Salvation Army and House of Friendship, were incredibly kind. After that first call to the food bank, I was redirected to the Salvation Army, where I was provided with the delivery of my first emergency food hamper. And these hampers include a mix of fresh, frozen, and non-perishable food and help me to stretch my limited budget a little further each month. Before I go, I'd like to share one more thing. Earlier this year in February, I received a food hamper delivery. The boxes were particularly heavy, and the volunteers kindly set the box near me in my living room. My legs and back were sore that day, so I couldn't put the delivery away immediately. I opened one of the boxes, and on top, I found a snackable lunch meat. I smiled at that snackable like an old friend. In the same box was an orange. There was dessert. That was the day that food became a vital connection between me and community. As I sat and ate my snackable, I began to accept the help I needed. I hugged all the food in that box that day. Until that day, I could not say the words food bank, Salvation Army, or House of Friendship without feeling ashamed for needing them. Now I say them with deep gratitude. I'm here to remind you that hunger can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time, even in your later years. And your support and donations make a difference. It may be one can of pasta sauce, a snackable, or a $5 donation. You are helping to provide food and hope to more than, listen to this, to more than 34,000 people in need in Waterloo region. Thank you so much to my patient friends, particularly Jenny, my best friend, and her family for their support as I learned to accept help. Thank you to the Food Bank, Salvation Army, House of Friendship, and all the programs throughout our wonderful Waterloo region, providing vital supports and services needed by thousands in our community. You have helped me break the cycle of not asking for help, gracing me with nutritious food, and helping me regain my dignity. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and have a great Wednesday.